I signed away my life on a Tuesday morning, except I didn't know it yet. My son stood beside me in that law office, smiling the way he used to when he was 7 and wanted extra dessert. Except now he was 43, and what he wanted was my house, my savings, and every last piece of the life his father and I had built over 52 years of marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it really began, because betrayal doesn't happen in one moment. It grows quietly, like mold behind the walls, until the whole structure is rotten and you never saw it coming. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was blessed. 2 children, a husband who worked himself to exhaustion to give us a good life, a beautiful colonial home in Westchester County with a garden I tended every spring. My daughter Sarah moved to Oregon after college and calls once a month if I'm lucky. But my son David stayed close. Too close as it turned out. 3 years ago, my husband Richard died of a heart attack in our driveway. He was carrying groceries. I found him there when I came home from my book club, paper bags scattered across the concrete, oranges rolling down toward the street. The doctors said it was instant, that he didn't suffer. I've never believed them. I think about those last seconds constantly, wonder if he was scared, if he thought of me. The grief was so heavy I couldn't breathe some days. I'd wake up reaching for him and find only cold sheets. David came to the funeral with his new wife Brittany. They'd been married 6 months, a courthouse ceremony I wasn't invited to because it was intimate and spontaneous. Brittany was 31, blonde, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She called me Mom immediately, which felt presumptuous, but I was too numb to care. David had always been my sensitive child, the one who needed more reassurance, more attention. After Richard died, he started coming by every few days. Checking on me, he said. Making sure I was eating. I was grateful. I was so desperately grateful not to be alone. If you've ever lost someone who was your entire world, you know exactly how I felt in those early months. You know how you'd do anything, believe anything, just to feel less empty. And if you do know that feeling, could you leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from? It helps me know I'm not alone in this. And please, check the description box for more stories like this one, because the truth is, I never thought something like this could happen to me. The changes started small. David suggested I add him to my checking account, just in case of emergencies. What if I fell and couldn't access my own money? It made sense. Then he wanted to be on the deed to the house, for estate planning purposes. His friend was a lawyer, he said, and had mentioned it would save on taxes when I eventually passed. The way he said eventually made it sound far away hypothetical. I was healthy. I had decades left, probably. So I signed. Brittany started coming with him on every visit. She'd walk through my house touching things, picking up my mother's crystal vase, Richard's police academy photo, the antique clock from our honeymoon in Vermont. This would look amazing in our living room, she'd say, and David would laugh like it was a joke. But her eyes were calculating, inventorying. She started calling me by my first name instead of Mom. Eleanor, you really shouldn't be managing all these finances alone. It's too stressful at your age. I was 68, not 90. I'd been balancing checkbooks since before she was born. But they were persistent, and I was tired. Grief is exhausting in ways people don't talk about. It's not just sadness, it's a physical weight that makes every decision feel impossible. So when David suggested I sign a power of attorney, just for medical decisions, I hesitated only briefly. He was my son. He loved me. The paperwork was complicated, full of legal language that blurred together. I remember asking him to explain one section, and he waved it away. Standard boilerplate, Mom. It just means I can talk to your doctors if you're ever incapacitated. I signed it in my kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon. Brittany wasn't there that day, and David seemed more like his old self, gentle, concerned, my little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. He made me tea while I read through the pages. Earl Grey, my favorite. It tasted slightly bitter, but I drank it anyway because he'd made it for me with his own hands, and that felt like love. 2 weeks later, I woke up in the hospital. The doctors said I'd had a fall, that David found me unconscious at the bottom of my stairs. I didn't remember falling. I didn't remember much of anything from that day, actually. There was a gap, a blurry space where hours should have been. They said it was probably the head injury, that memory loss was normal. They kept me for observation, ran tests, sent me home with David and Brittany because they said I shouldn't be alone. That's when I moved into their house. Temporarily, David said. Just until I was steady on my feet again. My beautiful colonial sat empty, my garden untended. I asked about going home every few days, and David would exchange looks with Brittany, concerned looks, the kind you give children or people who aren't quite right in the head. Mom, the doctors said you need supervision. Remember? I didn't remember. But they showed me discharge papers that seemed to say exactly that, so I stayed. Their house smelled like chemical air freshener and something else, something medicinal I couldn't place. They gave me a room upstairs, smaller than my bedroom at home, with a window that looked out at their neighbor's fence. Brittany brought me my meals on a tray. She was always very careful about my medications, laying out pills in a little paper cup, watching to make sure I swallowed them all. I started feeling foggy all the time, like I was moving through water. My thoughts came slowly, and sometimes I'd lose whole conversations, find myself mid-sentence with no idea what I'd been saying. When I asked to see my bank statements, David said everything was fine, that he was handling it all. When I asked to go home, he said the house needed repairs, that it wasn't safe for me yet. When I asked why I felt so strange, so disconnected, Brittany said it was grief catching up with me, that I needed to rest. Rest. That's all they ever said. Rest, Eleanor. Don't worry, Eleanor. We're taking care of everything, Eleanor. 6 months passed like that. Then one morning, David came into my room with paperwork and that same boyish smile. Mom, we need to go to the lawyer's office today. Just some routine stuff with the estate, making sure everything's properly documented. The lawyer's office. The words felt heavy, ominous, but I couldn't articulate why. My mind was so foggy. I nodded because what else could I do? He was my son, and I wanted so badly to trust him. The morning of the appointment, Brittany made me breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee with cream the way I liked it. She watched me eat, perched on the edge of the kitchen counter, swinging her legs like a child. Big day today, Eleanor. Make sure you finish all your coffee. You'll need the energy. There was something in her voice, a sharpness beneath the sweetness, but I was too fuzzy to process it. The coffee tasted different, slightly medicinal, but I drank it all because she kept prompting me. Come on, one more sip. Good girl. We drove to the law office in David's SUV. I sat in the back seat like a passenger in my own life, watching familiar streets slide past the window. I tried to remember the last time I'd driven, the last time I'd made a decision about where I was going. Months ago, maybe longer. Time had become elastic, unreliable. Brittany sat beside me in the back, her hand on my knee, squeezing periodically. You're doing great, Mom, she whispered, though I hadn't done anything yet. The law office was in a professional building I'd driven past 1,000 times. 3rd floor, modern furniture in the waiting room, soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. The receptionist smiled at us, and David gave her his name. She directed us to a conference room where a young woman in a gray suit was waiting. She introduced herself as Melissa Crawford, attorney at law. She looked about Sarah's age, which made me think of my daughter for the first time in weeks. When had I last talked to Sarah? I couldn't remember. Had I told her about the fall, about staying with David? Melissa laid out papers across the conference table. So many papers. She started explaining something about transferring assets, about ensuring proper care coordination, about my wishes for the future. Her words blurred together. I felt so tired suddenly, bone-deep exhausted. My hands were trembling, and I couldn't seem to make them stop. David pulled a chair out for me, guided me into it with a hand on my elbow. Just a formality, Mom. We've been over all this. Remember? I didn't remember. I couldn't remember anything clearly anymore. Brittany stood behind my chair, her hands on my shoulders, fingers pressing into the muscle hard enough to hurt. Eleanor's been so forgetful lately, she told Melissa, her voice dripping with false concern. We're just trying to make sure everything's protected in case her condition worsens. My condition. What condition? I wanted to ask, but my tongue felt thick, uncooperative. Melissa slid a document in front of me, pointing to a line at the bottom. Mrs. Whitmore, this document transfers ownership of your primary residence and associated accounts to your son, David Whitmore, with provisions for your continued care. Do you understand what you're signing? Did I? The words on the page swam. My house. They wanted my house. No, that wasn't right. David said it was for protection, for taxes, for my own good. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. David leaned close, guiding my hand to the line. Just a signature, Mom. Standard paperwork. His voice was gentle, patient, the voice he used to use when teaching me to use my first cell phone, like I was too old to understand complicated things. But something was wrong. Everything was wrong. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table. Behind me, Brittany's nails dug deeper into my shoulder, sharp enough that I gasped. She was hurting me deliberately, I realized through the fog. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. My heart started racing, panic cutting through whatever they'd given me in my coffee. I looked down at the document, at the blank line waiting for my signature, and suddenly I understood with perfect, terrible clarity. They'd been drugging me. For months. Making me compliant, confused, manageable. The fall that wasn't a fall. The fog that wouldn't lift. The isolation from Sarah, from my friends, from anyone who might ask questions. This was theft. This was abuse. And I was about to sign away everything Richard and I had built because I was too drugged and frightened to fight back. Unless. My hand was already moving toward the paper. Brittany's nails dug deeper. Sign it, Eleanor, she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Don't make this difficult. David was smiling at Melissa, casual, confident. He thought he'd won. They both thought I was too far gone to resist. But somewhere in my drugged, terrified brain, a spark of fury ignited. My husband died in our driveway carrying groceries for dinners we'd never eat together. I'd buried him in the suit he wore to our daughter's high school graduation. I'd planted roses by his grave every spring since. And now his son, our son, was stealing everything we'd built, everything Richard had worked himself to death to provide. No. No, I would not let this happen. If you've ever been pushed to a breaking point where fear turns to rage, you know that moment when something shifts inside you. When you realize you'd rather burn it all down than let them win. That's where I was, pen in my trembling hand, my son and his wife looming over me like vultures. And so I did the only thing I could think of. I started signing my name, but before I finished the last letter, I kept writing. Small letters, cramped together at the bottom of the page where signatures usually go. They drugged my morning coffee. I finished and dropped the pen. My hand was shaking violently now, either from the drugs or the adrenaline or both. I looked up at Melissa and tried to make my eyes focus, tried to will her to look at the document, to actually read what I'd written. She reached for the paper, glancing down automatically to verify the signature. Her eyes moved across the page. Then stopped. She went very still. Time seemed to suspend. Melissa's gaze flicked from the document to my trembling hands, to my face, to David's expectant expression, to Brittany's manicured nails still digging into my shoulder. I watched her process it all in maybe 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Then she stood abruptly, gathering the papers. "Excuse me for just one moment," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I need to make copies for your records." She walked out of the conference room and I knew with absolute certainty, that she wasn't making copies. The door closed behind her, and David frowned. That's odd. Usually they make copies before. Brittany's hands left my shoulders, and I heard her move to the window, looking out at the parking lot 3 floors below. The silence in that room was suffocating. My heart hammered so hard I thought they must be able to hear it. David pulled out his phone, checked it, put it away. Checked it again. What's taking so long? Brittany didn't answer, just stood at that window, tension radiating from her rigid shoulders. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. David stood and paced to the door, opened it, looked out into the hallway. I could hear voices, low and urgent, from somewhere else in the office. Then footsteps. Multiple sets. Melissa came back into the room, followed by 2 police officers. David's face went white. Brittany spun from the window, her expression finally showing something real, fear. "Mr. Whitmore," one of the officers said, "we need you and your wife to step outside, please." Everything unraveled faster than I could process. The police separated us immediately. David and Brittany were escorted to different rooms while Melissa stayed with me, and suddenly there were paramedics, too, checking my vital signs, asking me questions I could barely answer through the fog still clouding my brain. They drew blood. They shined lights in my eyes. They asked me to squeeze their hands, follow their fingers, tell them what day it was. I couldn't. I had no idea what day it was. Detective Rachel Morrison showed up within the hour. She was maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen too much. She sat across from me in a small office the law firm provided, Melissa still present as my attorney now, apparently, though I hadn't hired her. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rachel said gently, "I need to ask you some questions about what's been happening at your son's house. Can you do that for me?" Could I? I was so tired. But I started talking, and once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her about Richard dying, about the loneliness, about how David had gradually taken over my finances. The power of attorney, I thought, was just for medical decisions. The fall I didn't remember. Moving into their house, the meals Brittany prepared, the medications that multiplied week by week. The fog that never lifted. How I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to my daughter, the last time I'd been to my own home, the last time I'd made a single decision about my own life. Rachel wrote everything down, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. "When did you start feeling foggy?" she asked. I tried to think. After I signed the power of attorney, I thought. Right after that. I told her about the tea David made, how it tasted bitter. How Brittany always watched to make sure I took all my pills. How this morning's coffee tasted wrong. "We're going to need to test those blood samples," Rachel said. "And we're going to need to search your son's house. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be very direct with you. From what you're describing, this could be elder abuse, possibly illegal restraint, financial exploitation, and depending on what they were giving you, potentially assault. Do you understand?" I nodded, though understanding felt beyond me. My son. They were talking about charging my son with crimes against me. The blood tests came back that evening. Benzodiazepines in my system, levels consistent with regular, ongoing administration. Antipsychotics that I'd never been prescribed. My actual medications, for blood pressure and cholesterol, were barely present. They'd been substituting them with sedatives, keeping me compliant and confused. 4 months. When Rachel told me, I felt something crack inside my chest, some last hope that this had all been a misunderstanding, that David was still the little boy who used to cry when he saw roadkill on the highway because he was so tender-hearted. The search of David's house uncovered everything. My medications, the real bottles, hidden in their bedroom closet with Brittany's name on fake prescription labels. Documents showing they'd been systematically draining my accounts for 8 months, transferring thousands of dollars to their own names. Emails between David and Brittany planning this, referring to me as the problem and the obstacle. A calendar where Brittany had marked days as increased dosage and doctor appointment. Make sure she's too foggy to talk clearly. But the worst part, the part that made me physically ill when Rachel showed me, was the timeline. David had started this before Richard died. The power of attorney he'd insisted I sign was dated 2 weeks before my husband's heart attack. They'd been planning to take everything even while Richard was alive. Had they been patient enough to wait for him to die naturally, or... I couldn't let myself finish that thought. The police assured me there was no evidence of foul play in Richard's death. His doctor confirmed he'd had serious heart disease, that the heart attack was sadly inevitable. But the timing, the coincidence of David securing legal control of my affairs right before I became a widow, right before I was most vulnerable, that would haunt me forever. They found something else, too. My daughter Sarah's phone number blocked on my cell phone. Emails from her to me, dozens of them, increasingly frantic over the months I'd been at David's house. "Mom, why won't you call me back? Mom, David says you're not feeling well, but he won't let me talk to you." "Mom, I'm getting worried. Please just send me a text to let me know you're okay." David had been intercepting everything, isolating me completely. My own daughter thought I was ignoring her. Rachel let me call Sarah from her office. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. When Sarah answered, I started crying before I could even say hello. She was on a plane the next morning. The charges against David and Brittany were extensive. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, assault, false imprisonment. The district attorney told me they'd likely face significant prison time if convicted. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I just felt hollowed out. This was my son. I'd carried him for 9 months. I'd taught him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, to be kind to people who had less than we did. I'd loved him with everything I had, and he'd spent months systematically destroying me for money. Brittany turned on David almost immediately, looking for a plea deal. She claimed it was all his idea, that she'd been afraid of him, that she'd tried to stop it. The evidence told a different story. She'd been a full partner in every decision, every drugged meal, every stolen dollar. But she was young and blonde and knew how to cry on command. Her lawyer was already spinning a narrative of coercion and manipulation. David said nothing. He refused to talk to the police, to his own attorney, to me. The one time I saw him after his arrest, being led through the courthouse in handcuffs, he looked right through me like I wasn't there. My son, who used to hold my hand crossing streets when he was small, looked at me with such cold emptiness that I almost didn't recognize him. Who had he become? Or had he always been this person, and I'd been too blind to see it? I moved back into my house 3 weeks after the law office incident. It felt different, violated somehow, knowing David had keys, had been in and out while I was imprisoned at his place. I changed all the locks the first day. Sarah stayed with me for 2 months, helping me sort through the financial wreckage, attending meetings with lawyers and victim advocates, just being there when the nightmares woke me up at 3 in the morning. The fog lifted gradually. It took weeks for my system to fully clear, for my thoughts to feel sharp again. Some days were better than others. I still have gaps in my memory from those lost months, probably always will. But I was me again, Eleanor Whitmore, not some drugged puppet being manipulated by people who were supposed to love me. Check the description box below for more stories like this, because the truth is, elder abuse happens more often than anyone wants to admit. It happens in nice families in nice neighborhoods, and everyone acts shocked when it comes to light, but it's happening right now behind closed doors, to someone's mother or father or grandmother. We need to talk about it. We need to watch for the signs. The trial took 14 months to reach court. Longest 14 months of my life, longer even than the year after Richard died. At least grief had a purity to it, a cleanness. This was contaminated by rage and guilt and questions that had no good answers. Sarah moved her business online and stayed with me for most of that time. She'd always been the self-sufficient one, the child who didn't need as much attention. Now I understood what a gift that had been, what a gift she still was. She asked me once why I thought David had done it. I had no answer. I still don't. Brittany took the plea deal 2 months before trial. 5 years for her role in the abuse, with a possibility of parole after 3. She had to testify against David as part of the agreement. Watching her on the witness stand was surreal. She cried, of course. Claimed she'd loved me, that David had pressured her, that she'd been scared to refuse him. The prosecutor tore her apart on cross-examination, pointing out every email she'd written, every medication adjustment she'd made, every dollar she'd spent from my stolen accounts. Did my client force you to buy a $20,000 handbag with Mrs. Whitmore's money? Did he threaten you when you transferred funds to your mother's account in Nevada? She had no good answers. The jury looked at her with disgust, which felt like a small mercy. At least they could see what she was. David's trial was harder. His lawyer tried to paint him as a devoted son overwhelmed by my declining mental health, acting in my best interest. They brought in a psychologist who testified about caregiver stress, about how adult children sometimes make misguided decisions out of love. It was a clever strategy, trying to reframe abuse as misguided care. But Rachel's testimony was damning. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence, the medications, the forged signatures, the blocked phone calls, the financial transfers. The timeline showing this started before Richard died. My testimony was worse. I had to sit there and describe what it felt like to lose months of my life, to realize my own child had been poisoning me. I had to admit that I still loved him, even after everything, which made it hurt so much more. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, David was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. He showed no reaction, just stood there in his suit looking at some point on the back wall. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to say something, to apologize, to explain, to show some flicker of the boy who used to cry at roadkill. He never did. They led him away, and I haven't seen him since. The financial recovery took longer. The lawyers managed to claw back about 60% of what they'd stolen, but legal fees ate up most of that. The house was still mine, at least. The garden was overgrown but salvageable. Sarah helped me plant new roses that spring, different varieties than before. I couldn't look at the old ones without thinking about Richard's grave, about how David had desecrated that memory. People in town look at me differently now. There are the pitying looks, the ones who whisper about that poor woman whose son tried to steal her house. There are the ones who avoid me entirely, afraid that tragedy might be contagious. And there are a precious few, who just treat me like Eleanor, who invite me to book club and don't ask about the trial unless I bring it up first. Those are the friends worth keeping. I think about revenge sometimes. I think about writing to David in prison, telling him exactly how much he destroyed, how many nights I wake up unsure if I'm drugged or dreaming, how I have to count my pills every morning to make sure the bottles haven't been tampered with. I think about visiting Brittany when she's released, asking her if that handbag was worth it, if she ever thinks about what she did to an old woman who just lost her husband. But I don't. Revenge isn't about them anymore. My revenge is surviving. It's being here, in my house, in my garden, with my daughter who calls me every single day now. It's having my mind clear and my decisions my own. It's knowing that they're in cages, both of them, while I'm free. They tried to bury me, and instead I buried them. I'm 70 now. 2 years have passed since that morning at the lawyer's office, since I scrawled those words at the bottom of a legal document with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 2 years since Melissa Crawford noticed and made the choice to investigate instead of looking away. I think about that a lot, about how different this story could have ended if she'd just filed the paperwork and moved on. How many people in her position would have done exactly that? Sarah is pregnant with her first child, my first grandchild. A girl. She's asked me to help once the baby is born, to share the wisdom of my years. I said yes, though I'm terrified. What wisdom do I have? I couldn't even see my own son destroying me from the inside out. But Sarah reminds me that I survived. That I fought back when it mattered most. That I chose to write the truth instead of signing it away. Maybe that's the wisdom, that it's never too late to fight for yourself, even when you're terrified, even when you're outnumbered, even when the people hurting you are the ones you love most. Richard never met the man David became. I'm grateful for that, at least. He died believing his son was good, believing we'd built something lasting and strong. Sometimes I envy him that delusion. Other times I think maybe he knew, maybe he saw what I couldn't, and that's part of why his heart gave out. The weight of knowing what was coming and being unable to stop it. I'll never know. What I do know is this: cruelty comes in many forms, and sometimes it wears the face of family. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. And sometimes when you're at your lowest, when you're drugged and scared and convinced no one will help you, a small act of courage, writing 7 words in shaky handwriting, can save your life. I still have that document, the one with my message scrawled at the bottom. The prosecutor gave it back after the trial. I keep it in a safe deposit box at the bank, along with Richard's police academy badge and my mother's wedding ring. Evidence of survival. Evidence that I was here, that I mattered, that I didn't go quietly into whatever dark place my son had planned for me. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven him. The question irritates me. Forgiveness is what people want from you when your pain makes them uncomfortable, when your anger disrupts their illusion of a fair and just world. I don't know if I'll ever forgive David. I don't know if I should. What I've done instead is make peace with the fact that I loved someone who was never who I thought he was. Maybe that's not forgiveness. Maybe it's just acceptance that some questions don't have answers, some losses can't be recovered, and some betrayals are too deep to ever fully heal. The garden helps. I spend hours out there most days, weather permitting. There's something honest about plants. They grow or they don't, they need water and sun and care, and they never pretend to be something they're not. Richard used to say I had a gift for making things grow. I'm trying to believe that again, trying to grow something new from the scorched earth David left behind. Sarah arrives next week with her husband. We're going to start setting up the nursery in the room that used to be hers. Fresh paint, new curtains, a rocking chair I bought from an estate sale. I'm going to rock my granddaughter in that chair and tell her stories about her great-grandfather, about the good man he was, about the life he built with his hands and his heart. I won't tell her about her uncle, not for a long time. Maybe never. Let her grow up knowing love first. The world will teach her about betrayal soon enough. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to an old woman's story. Thank you for bearing witness to what happened to me, for not looking away when it got ugly. Because it did get ugly, didn't it? Real life usually does. But we survive anyway. We plant new roses and wait for grandbabies and count our pills every morning just to be sure. We survive. Please check the description box below for more stories like this one. Real stories, hard stories, stories about people who fought back when everything seemed lost. Because the truth is, we're all more fragile than we want to admit. We're all one fall, one signature, one betrayal away from losing everything. But we're also stronger than we know. We're survivors. We're still here. And that, in the end, is the only revenge that truly matters.